Good afternoon. It's Tuesday, May the 17th at 5 p.m. UK time. Welcome to this week's What Comes Next Live. My guest this week is the formidable, inspiring and indomitable Christine Esson, who I first met shortly after I moved to London around 5 years ago. She gave me a tremendously warm welcome. She is an amazing connector and networker. And she, along with her partner, business partner, developed an amazing network which has gained tremendous traction, which I have attended a number of their events and been very impressed, not least with, in fact, not the correct language, definitely with Christine's style of supporting members of the network, but also the people who come to present and getting things out of them through being a great interviewer and really getting to the heart of what they're looking for, what their gaps are, what the opportunities are they see. I won't necessarily look to deeply interview Christine here, but really just to give her a space to chat. So great to see you, Christine, albeit virtually, seeing as you're no longer in the London area terribly often, or as often as before.
I know, Tom. It's yes. I'm now have returned to Scotland, and apparently, Tom, I'm suffering from reverse cultural syndrome, as I've been advised by Claire Alexander. So, still got a foot in both camps, and I'm suffering from a syndrome.
Well, speaking as somebody who carries two nationalities equally, neither of which is English, even though I tend to speak with an English accent when I'm not chatting with a Scot, I certainly suffer from very multiple different cultural identity anomalies. But anyway, tell us a wee bit for the audience. Tell us a bit about yourself, and then whatever's top of mind for you.
Sure. Well, again, thanks, Tom, for this opportunity. It's always good to have a chat with you. Always good to catch up. Bit about me. I used to say I'm a Scot living in London, working for the Irish, which was my identity for a number of years. But I'm a Scot. I'm an accountant by training, and although my specialism, particularly for the last 30 years, and something I'm really passionate about, is economic development. I've worked in global organisations here in Scotland. I've also had the pleasure and privilege of working for Enterprise Ireland for a number of years. And now I have a number of strings to my bow. I am, as you said earlier, co-founder of Scottish Business Network. I'm also, and I've just spent the day being a participant at the Women's Enterprise Scotland training event. I'm a very proud and supportive WES ambassador, and hopefully we'll get a chance to talk about that as well. And another part of a role that I play is I'm an ambassador, one of the first ambassadors for a 400-year-old charity. And that charity is ScotsCare. And it was founded 400 years ago to help those Scots who'd followed James VI of Scotland, the first of England, down to the capital, who soon discovered the streets were not paved with gold. And a group of Scots businessmen, and it was businessmen, got together and put money in a fund, literally in a charity box. And sadly, Tom, that charity and the need to support Scots who've come down to London, or their first generation, their offspring, is still needed, and in fact, even more so needed today. So hopefully that gives you a wee bit of the Christine Esson, the professional Christine Esson.
Okay. And for some reason, with all of our chats, I never realised your first background professionally was as an accountant.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I refer to myself as a recovering accountant.
I am. I always say to myself, I'm a recovering workaholic. But yes, I started my career, my degrees in accountancy and economics. And I started my career, I have to tell you, because it's one of the great jobs that I had. I used to work for the Nestle company. And you'll know this business. I know this is going out globally, Tom, but I worked for Macauan's, the toffee company.
Oh, yes, I'm definitely of the age of Macauan's toffee bar.
With the wham bar, etc., and penny chews. Sure, that's bringing a lot of memories and sore teeth back to a number of folk listening. And it was a bit like the Willy Wonka chocolate factory, because at 9 a.m. every day we had the tasting, and whatever had had come off the production line or whatever was due to go on the production line, you tasted that morning. And then even better, during downtime in the summer when the factory was closed, they would try out different recipes of things. And it really was whatever the staff came up with and the chief manufacturer came up with. So you had some amazing stuff. So that was where my career was, and then fabulous couple of years with OKI, an inward investor here in Scotland, which was just amazing to work for the Japanese. And I know, so often your chats is about leadership, and I think to experience leadership within a Japanese format and then to move to a very Scottish leadership group, as I did eventually, and then the Irish, I've seen all different sides of it, Tom.
That's interesting. I'm going to throw a curveball out. I saw a friend of mine tweet something, and they are what I'd refer to as a political animal. They have lived most of their career with a professional radius. They're not originally from London, but most of their professional radius has been within half a mile of Whitehall. So it's policy, wonkishness, totally political. And they shared an article by somebody who's a political correspondent today, along the lines of the business of Britain should be business. Let's stop worrying about the latest 24-hour news cycle, whatever, and let's focus on productivity and business. And it was interesting. And then reading on the rest of the article was very much about all of the 24-hour news cycle, political, whether it's Partygate or whatever else is current for Britain. But their perception was that there isn't a vibrant business culture in the UK. And of course, they then leapt across to the US and saying, but they're great at this and blah, blah, blah. And I've spent the vast majority of my career in a sort of US Canadian centric world. I lived on the other side of the Atlantic for 27 years. And I think there's pros and cons of both, but I think you and I have spent our, relative to the UK, right, our careers around ecosystems that are full of vibrancy. Yes, raw productivity numbers may not be, we haven't, come up with the latest internet-based platform like Alphabet or Meta, they now call it, or whatever. But I think we see this productivity, I think we see the vibrancy of business all the time. And perhaps maybe you could give your thoughts towards that. I mean, I'm biasing that in my direction because I am a business and entrepreneurial person. But I think perhaps that's also an opportunity to talk about what was the gap you saw for Scottish Business Network.
Yeah, perhaps. Yeah. I've just spent the day with a group of fellow Women Enterprise Scotland ambassadors. The words vibrancy, energy, positivity, without being Pollyannish about it, was evident in that room. There is a vibrancy there. And in fact, the COVID word really wasn't spoken about much, which I'm relieved about. The Brexit word, I think we're just going through the alphabet now. We've got the Brexit and then with the COVID, I dread to think what the D word is. But yes, the Brexit and the challenges, oh my goodness me, the challenges did come up in conversation. But to talk about productivity in that grouping was to see it in action of women who have bootstrapped their business, who have challenged themselves every single day. I would be disappointed, and I don't think I'd be doing my job if I didn't think that there was a level of energy and enthusiasm, and let's just get on with it. You used the term formidable with me at the start, and you're right, Tom, I don't suffer fools gladly. And I do tend to, well, come on, let's find a solution. I don't tend to see the problems. I like to see the solutions, and what I've experienced today was about solutions. And Women's Enterprise Scotland meeting its 10-year anniversary is about finding a solution regarding role models for women who want to go into business or who are thinking about it. But to your earlier point about the gap that I saw as a Scot living in London, working for the Irish was, just to give you a bit of history as to why I'd been recruited to Enterprise Ireland. I'd actually taken a year out, Tom. I'd taken a year out and I'd travelled the world because, yeah, I'd done my leadership bit. I'd got to really senior roles within the Scottish public sector. And quite frankly, I'd had enough. Tom, I'd really had enough. And I found myself saying one day to the then boss, well, wish you all the very best in what you're doing next in my performance plan, but I won't be there to help you see it through. Literally found the words coming out. And so I took a year out and I joined. It was an advert, again, a bit of history, an advert on Friday in this Glasgow Herald, for someone with economic development experience, but importantly, a strong network to join Enterprise Ireland and head up its then Scotland office. I then went up on and headed up the UK office, the largest office of the over 30 offices Enterprise Ireland has globally. But what I saw, Tom, when I moved to London, my worry was, where's my London network? Where is this group that I can just reach out to? Because EI invests in 100 new business startups per annum. And I've had a small team. Those 100, the first 100 of 70% of them, the first export market they'd come to was the UK.
Right.
So how did you work that small team with 70 year one, 140 year two, etc., etc.? How did you support them? And what I did was I used the Irish diaspora, who are active at a very strong level, because people didn't want to hear from me about sustainable market entry because I had that government tag.
Right.
Instead, they would far rather hear from Tom McCallum from Cork, who'd moved from Cork to London and could share his expertise. So I was out morning, noon and night telling the story of Irish entrepreneurs. So the gap, I looked around and said, who's telling the story of Jacine and Paul of the rum company in Edinburgh? Who's telling the story of Ian and Susie Miller of the Scottish Bee Company? Who's telling the story of Gavin Neat of Neatbox, who's got a development app on your phone to help those with disabilities cross the road safely and manage the crossing safely? And in fact, part of it is in TfL as well. Who is telling those stories to the Scottish diaspora? I looked around and I couldn't find anybody. I genuinely couldn't find that happening. I don't know your experience, Tom, of how do you find out about Scottish entrepreneurs in London or when you were in the Caymans?
Go back to Scotland.
Exactly.
But I made a conscious point of doing that because I worked effectively for a private holding company that invested in businesses, and Scotland was one of our target geographies. And it wasn't simply because I was originally from there. We saw gaps. But you had to go there and then use your network there. But yes, you clearly saw a gap for that. So, what was the structure that you put together for connecting the diaspora to Scottish businesses looking to export to, as we've discussed before, the primary market is often the UK, England, outside Scotland, and within that, often that all roads lead, like Dick Whittington or James I and VI, to London.
Exactly. I mean, as I say, I'm an accountant, I'm an economist by trade. So the latest statistics, 346,000 Scottish businesses registered here in Scotland, less than 4%, that's 11,000 companies export. And when we talk about export, when I talk about export, Tom, it is about anything over the border. So anything outside of Scotland is an export. And the majority of Scottish exports come to the south. But think of that, 11,000 out of 346,000 companies export. So my opportunity is to take, and I've mentioned several of those companies, I can go on for hours of the different businesses. How about just putting those companies up there and in front of the Scottish diaspora,
Mhm.
because that is such a strong force in London. And nobody had ever put them up on a regular basis and say, right, okay, Claire Campbell of Prickly Thistle, who are you? What do you do? And importantly, and this is the critical point, Tom, what's your laser focused ask?
Mhm.
Don't tell me that you've got a SaaS system that would really help with HR. So I'm looking to talk to anybody in the engineering, anyone with an HR qualification within an engineering company in London. No, that doesn't work. I want to talk to Fred Smith of Company X, because from my intelligence gathering, I believe my product and service would be of value to him. That laser focused ask, Tom, is our USP. And what we have done for 6 years is tell the story. We're very good Scots at telling story, but thanks to your little nudge to me very early doors, don't let them tell their story, Christine. Just give them a fixed period of time and ask questions. So that's what we do. We ask questions, simple questions, but most importantly, Tom, we ask these businesses for laser focused ask. And it's from that ask to the diaspora that we've been able to help so many businesses in their export growth and ambition.
I mean, I remember the very first event of yours that I attended, and it was Ignition Law. If I remember right, Scotland also has something which Ireland's not quite the same on. It has a lot of stealth Scots like me who, through living internationally, have dropped the accent. And I seem to remember Alex McPherson, I think his name was, runs Ignition Law, another sort of stealth Scot. Fantastically interesting law firm in and of itself. But the event, I remember one of the more really vibrant and fast-growing accountancy and related services businesses out of Aberdeen, AAB, used to be known as Anderson Brown, were there, and they were looking to get into London. But I remember that what you did that particular evening was like, you did brilliantly at being, I was checking my gender bias actually. I was going, well, I wasn't using a word with that. Was I using an unconscious bias? No, but you genuinely are formidable and inspiring, and it's absolutely not gender related. You did an incredible job of just like getting the person who wasn't terribly comfortable standing up in people and saying how great the company was, which is something actually Americans are pretty good at doing. And that, going back to that first point, and just helping them, even though you'd coached them beforehand, helping them drill down another level from the ask, so that it was just amazing. And the thought that occurred to me is, having lived so many years in the Cayman Islands, where the old joke of 6 degrees of separation from Kevin Bacon, where you can connect to anybody in the world. In Cayman, it's 1 degree. You're never more than one person away from a phone call. And I found my own experience of connecting to people in Scotland over about 27 years overseas, and even now I'm still in London, is I'm never more than 1 or 2 conversations away from people. And I think one of the things you can sometimes do, you can go, okay, I want to speak to so-and-so who's the chief HR officer at this retail bank. But then you go, can you tell us why you particularly think that business is the right target? And if they say that, then your follow-up could be, could you think of some other businesses that could work? And actually, you're also addressing the 70+ diaspora who by this point in the room are going, how can I help them? And they'll tap them on the shoulder afterwards and say, I know you mentioned so-and-so from this retail bank, but from the follow-up questions Christine or Russell asked you, right, I've got somebody I think you should meet. So that's the SBN stuff, and it's very cool. And while I reflect on what you talked about before about women's enterprise, my mother just visited me from the west of Scotland, and she's basically retired now, except for certain coaching clients who won't let her retire in her mid-70s. But she's my role model, and one of my female role models in this, because she went back to uni to do a 1-year diploma in her late 30s. They asked her to teach the course on getting women back into business. And then she set up her own consulting and training company for about 20 years. And my stepfather quit his executive job to go work for her. And now, there's so many, every time I go up to Scotland to see a conference, there are so many amazing women leaders. And what particularly strikes me, and I don't know why this is popping into my head from being inspired by you, is I work mostly over the years with women clients. But if they're often for me, they're in their 40s or 50s. They're very established leaders. And they've been there, done that, got the t-shirt, whether building their own business or working in a corporate job. They've had to work so much harder to get where they are. So by the time they're in a position to inspire, be role models, and give back, this modern phrase, lived experience, is crossed so many more bridges, climbed so many more mountains than the typical bloke. So I just happen to be much more inspired by a Marie Macklin or a Poonam Malik or an Anna Stewart than I would be, no offense, than most of my Scottish male business leader friends.
Yeah, you're so right, Tom. I mean, of course, to quote another Christine, well, I would say that, wouldn't I? But yes, I would say that. These are individuals who have, I mean, these are the stats, have started up their business with 53% less capital than men, who will significantly underplay how much capital they're seeking to raise, who are fighting against that unconscious and sometimes very conscious bias within the cultural situation. We heard today from the wonderful Jacine of Magenta Rum Company in Scotland, and she was telling about her crowdfund. Over the 2 weeks, she raised just over 300,000. Her target was 300,000. She raised 318,000. Phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. And when Jacine and I spoke about this while she was going through the process, she realized she was standing up not just for women in business, she was also standing up for women of color in business, because she took the conscious decision to be any detail that they were being sent out about the business. You saw Jacine first. Mm-hmm. You then saw Paul, her partner, later on. Right. So people had to understand this is who you're buying into. Yeah. So the burden, as well as being a women's enterprise seeking that funding, was of a woman of color, and she really felt that pressure. Mm-hmm. So how could you not fail to be inspired when Jacine hit that target and exceeded it? Mm-hmm. But my question, of course, to Jacine is, should you actually have gone for 500K? Should you, because, and she admits that herself, she admits that, well, maybe we did undersell it, but we got the 300, and that runway that allows us is phenomenal. But
for a startup alcohol company, that's a great chunk of change to get started with.
Fantastic. But she's bootstrapped it for the last 6 years. And that is such a common issue here. And I just love what Women's Enterprise Scotland is doing, because that was a room full of individuals. Yes, a number within the consulting side, a number in the mindfulness area, which is fantastic. And I know our own Fiona McKinnon from the Moment Company, fabulous business about focusing. Just take a moment, take a breath, move forward. And I was inspired by the Baby Ballet Company in Charlotte. Can you imagine a dance company, how they've survived the last 2 years? Oh, I just went online, Christine, went for it. But it's these stories, Tom, it's these inspirational stories. But your mum, fact that she's done that for 40 years, she's still meeting the same challenges today. And I think of a phrase I heard recently: we're not trying to fix women here. What we're seeking to do is to get an equality, an economic equality and parity in the workplace, because we're already, within Scotland alone, 230,000 jobs are attributed to women entrepreneurs. 8.8 billion is brought to the Scottish economy thanks to women entrepreneurs. That's phenomenal. But where is our voice? Where are we heard? And where is our economic parity in that?
Well, I've got two thoughts to beat that drum, because it's something I talk about a lot. And the first one is equity rather than equality. Yeah. Right? If you're not given the same opportunities, if everybody's standing behind a fence to look over to look at the football because they can't afford a ticket, if somebody's 5 foot tall and somebody's 6 foot tall and the fence is 6 foot high, and you give them a 6-inch step, only the 6 foot tall person, who by the way is normally male, is going to be able to look over and see the match. It means you need to give a bigger step to the person who needs a bigger leg up. The other thing you talked about was, I love it's a classic Christine question. So what would have happened if you'd asked for 500,000? It reminds me of and you would know the stats better than me, but I'll be broadly accurate in the range when it comes to employment. So it's much the same as an entrepreneur having the bravery to ask for funding or the sale. Is that when it comes to jobs, there's a stat along the lines of men only need to feel they've got 75% of the requirements to apply. Women need to feel they've got 110% of them. So for the women listening to this, if they can just take that on board and honestly inquire of themselves, two things. One, am I asking for 100% of what I can ask for reasonably? And secondly, if I'm not, who can help me with that? And a wee plug for something I did last summer was I got set up with 5 amazing women, a short podcast series called Elevating Leaders. And these were all women, late 30s to early 40s, including a fellow Scot, inspiring Scot that we know has also been a guest on this show, my friend Maeve Gillis. But women from all over the world, from Australia to Cayman to London to Scotland, interviewed by a New Yorker. And there's 4 short 15-minute podcasts, but the broad theme is ask for help. And the earlier you ask, the better. It was really targeted at women stepping out into business, maybe their first venture or a career progression, maybe late 20s to mid 30s, who might not think I can afford it or whatever, or just, it doesn't have to be somebody you pay for. But if you don't feel like you're really stepping into your potential, who can you ask for help?
Yeah, and that's where Wes and I hope Scottish Business Network have got it right, because we ourselves are the individuals who've sought funding, who've tried to do the business plan, who've asked for advice, and those communities are there to help you. And sometimes, Tom, it's just the simplest of things that you can do. I mean, as you know, I get invited to so many events, and which is a joy and a privilege for me. I always make sure I take one person along with me. Just one person, because that fear, you spoke about the fear of, well, is that job right for me because I'm not 110% fitting the skill set? That fear of walking into a networking environment where you can ask for help, but for many women, that is daunting. I mean, you know yourself, Tom, it's not your natural comfort.
Yes, you know me well. It's like, it's not my thing.
I loved that conversation you and Ollie Barrett had around that. But for women in particular, that is not a comfortable situation. Yes. And, you know, again, another great story is a wonderful Anna Gill. I think Anna's 25 years of age, set up her business 18 months ago in Aberdeen. And she realized, this is kind of lonely. I'm a digital marketer. She's doing phenomenal work. It's kind of lonely. Let me see if I can find other women like this. Well, on the 3rd of June in Aberdeen, I think she's got about 80 or 100 women like her turning up, paying 40 quid a head for an event to network with other women, to hear from some poor souls like me about why this is of value. Who are your mentors? Who are your supporters? But we need women that is willing to step out of their comfort zone to do that. But you only just need to do one thing. And sometimes that one thing is saying, look, I'm going to this. Do you want to come along with me? That's sometimes all you need to do, Tom.
That's just struck me really strongly, because I honestly have never thought to do that. If I'm invited to an event, who could I bring with me? I'm slapping my forehead going, I could have been doing that for years. So it's just, can be just one thing. And I mean, mentoring is you know, is often about tips and tricks. You know, my favorite one of yours is the Scot who gets on the plane from Edinburgh, Glasgow, or Aberdeen or whatever, and wanders around London with a trolley bag. And, you know, your first one is ditch the trolley bag. You know, don't make it like you're just here for the day. And sometimes they can be granular tips like that, but other times it's just the confidence people get seeing somebody who's been there, done that, got the t-shirt. And, you know, when women can be supporting other women and also men be allies, then we can help uplift and do what we can. So
Yes,
very,
just
very
bang,
cool.
bang that drum, Tom, bang that drum. But yeah, I'd forgotten about the trolley bag one. Do you know, I realised why I haven't said that recently. It's because we've all been sitting at home. I was thinking, I haven't used that one recently. Yes, yeah, but yeah.
Well, yes, that was the thing, wasn't it? Particularly, back when there was the RBS shuttle running into London City 30 times a day before the financial crisis, and people would just go, "I'll just do the days, so I don't have to do the hotel." And of course, it just reinforces the stereotype of Scots being cheap. But it's not that; it's that entrepreneurs are time poor, so I can only take a day in London because I've got a business to run.
Yeah.
But your stats around lack of export are amazing. And I remember an event that was run not by SBN, clearly, that was run in, I think it was the last week of July or the first week of August in London by one of the agencies looking to promote Scottish business. And they went, "Oh, seems really quiet in London." And it's because the summer holidays are a different period, and they hadn't tuned into the fact that if you come at the beginning of the English summer holidays, which are about 4 weeks later than the beginning of the Scottish ones, London's empty. Nobody puts events on. No wonder that all the venues were free.
Yeah.
So we have to, be cross-cultural, even London to Edinburgh or Edinburgh to Glasgow. But let's get outside. But your thing is, let's get outside.
Yeah.
Let's bring in those experiences from elsewhere and connect. You're even now taking SBN to the States, aren't you, and beyond?
Yeah, I mean, I'll come through in that point is about cultural awareness, how that all came about, and our SBN USA, a separate legal entity in the USA, being established 2 years ago, was because Scotland has an economic strategy called a trading nation. And when it was published about 3-4 years ago, it was talking about how the Scots, how we're going to export and what were the key markets we're going to export. However, nobody had asked the diaspora, what's your view of Scotland as a trading nation? What's your view of Scots as exporters? And yes, of course, I'm delighted, we're trustworthy, we're good to do business with. But what the key thing that came through that piece of research that we did was the fact that we lack a strong cultural awareness and understanding. And that small point you just made about holidays, fundamental. So when Russell, my business partner, Russell Dalglish, and I worked in this research with a company at that stage called Momentous Change, that was a key point that came out of it. So what also came out was by reaching out to all these Scots to ask our very short and concise questionnaire, they all said, no one's ever asked me that question. I've lived in Hong Kong for 20 years. I've lived in Houston, Texas for 30 years. No one's ever asked me, what do I think about my fellow Scots as exporters? And out of that has come Scottish Business Network Global, with ambassadors across the globe, from Fiona in New Zealand, shortly to be leaving New Zealand to come back and see her family after 2 years of lockdown, to Fraser in Singapore, to the wonderful Ian Houston and the board of Scottish Business Network USA of Lorraine and Fraser. These are phenomenal individuals giving their time voluntarily for Scottish exporters. How lucky are we to have such an active diaspora willing to give their time, their insight for Scottish exports? How come we're not pushing that dial past the 4% when you have that expertise at your fingertips for free?
Something hit me, as you know, I've been one of the founder members of Global Scot from 20 plus years ago, which is another network. And they did some research along with Visit Scotland a little bit before the Trading Nation thing came out, to look at what do people think about Scots. And of course, the classic stuff comes out about Scots are trustworthy and hardworking and ethical. And as a member of the Scottish Institute of Chartered Accountants, we're known for that. It's a brand. But I guess it goes back hundreds of years to empire. And in fact, they don't even teach about the Darien fiasco in Scottish schools. Scotland bankrupted itself.
Correct.
When the English made all the money going to Virginia colony and stuff like this. And I'll put to one very large side the history of colonialism, but the part of that links to Scotland is that Scots were known for being highly educated and helping the people with money make more money.
Yes.
So to this day, I'm thinking to myself, oh, I'm connecting to how many of the people Scots I know overseas work in corporates or work as accountants or work in other roles. But so when they did all that research, they were asking, what do you think about Scots? But it's this tiny and yet really important thing. We've had a lot of tiny and important things today. But as exporters, as business leaders or entrepreneurs exporting from Scotland, and absolutely, I can imagine that those people in Hong Kong or San Francisco or wherever else never been asked that question. What do you think of your fellow Scots? Fine, but what do you think of your fellow Scots as exporters? And if those people may well be managing partners of law firms or bankers in Hong Kong, right? They're not all going to be entrepreneurs and importers and exporters, but they will know through their networks people that they can connect other people to. Once the laser-like focused question will lead to laser-like focus ask. So yes, this is a classic marketing line I will, use all the time, is that the one word around your market positioning is focus.
Yeah.
And I think you're just brilliant at applying the scalpel or the laser. So
yes, the laser focused as, but it is about that cultural understanding. It is about that awareness, and people want to share that knowledge, that expertise. People do business with people, Tom.
Yes.
And when you make that connection, it's not about spreadsheets. It's not, people don't do business with spreadsheets. People do business with people. That's what it is. And those connections, because they might be in Hong Kong for 30 odd years, but I'm actually from Camlin. Do you know Camlin? Yeah, actually, I do know Camlin. I used to work at the McCown's Toffee Factory in Stenhousemuir. You never did. My auntie worked there. You will always find that connection. Mm-hmm. And that's what makes a difference, because you have to find that connection in order to be seen as trustworthy, in order to be seen as somebody you want to do business with. And mm-hmm. so many relationships, one of the side benefits of Scottish Business Network is the relationships that have developed mm-hmm. on a really personal level. Yep. Because people like folk, and when you've got that connection. So it's something that is an aside to what Russell and I immediately set out to achieve. We just wanted to tell the story about the great entrepreneurial activity that's happening in Scotland. And just as a wee aside, Tom, I'm kind of conscious of the time. I was at an event a couple of weeks ago in a well-known Scottish institution in near Hyde Park in London. And a gentleman came over to me without a word of a lie. And he introduced himself and he said, "So, Christine, I looked at your profile before I spoke to you tonight." And I thought, all right, okay. He says, "I think you must have the toughest job in the world." "Really?" Says I thought, well, this is going to be interesting. He says, "Yes, I see that you're there to help Scottish entrepreneurs. I mean, goodness me, that must be the toughest job in the world." Well, I think as he slowly crawled away from me after having, I think at least I gave him half a dozen Scottish entrepreneurs that he needed to know about, and all the things that we've just spent the last 30 minutes talking about, he realised I didn't have the toughest job in the world. I possibly had one of the best jobs in the world, Tom, because I'm telling the story about fantastic entrepreneurs that I have the privilege of knowing are based in Scotland. What a great job.
Yes, a last story, then I will ask you to have the last word and last thoughts. And we've been name dropping quite a lot now today, right? To really just let people know some names of some very cool people doing cool things. About 5 years ago, a bit longer than that, I got to know a lady called Colleen Grant, who you might know for, it used to be a bit of Grant Property up in Scotland. Wonderful woman with a big heart, brilliant businesswoman, brilliant leader. And she had a young woman working for her in London trying to build business at the time called Nicole Perry, who has gone on to continues in London doing some amazing things. In fact, I think I saw Nicole's social media and she's like riding the Tour de France route or something for charity. And I said, well, I'll go along and to this event that you put, this event put at this venue you talked about, which is full of Scottish people of a certain age and stage and perhaps bias, to whom you normally have to brush cobwebs off the shoulders of their tweed jackets when you walk in the venue. So this young, vibrant woman has to give a talk to these people, and I just felt for her. It was, but you know what? She brushed that experience off and is rocking and rolling and doing all kinds of other cool things. So yeah, if we come in with perceptions, it's going to be difficult. It's going to be difficult. To be honest, when I hear people like that, I tend to be very polite and just move on to the people who can get out of the way and let people are going to do it, just do it. So
well, I hope I educated him. I hope I educated
very politely,
him.
I'm sure. So what are your kind of closing thoughts from our chat for the audience?
Oh, well, I mean, my closing thought is Scottish Enterprise. We have a fantastic entrepreneurial activity. The enterprise in Scotland is something I'm incredibly proud of and to support. If you want to know more, check us out. Check out Scottish Business Network. Check out, we're actually running a series of events because through the Logan ecosystem funding, we are doing a series of Quake events, QUAICH. Our next one's on the 9th of June, where we'll be talking about Scottish expertise in GovTech and EdTech and sharing that with the phenomenal work that's happening in similar sectors with Estonia and with Tallinn. We're also going to be running the same with Singapore and with LA. Really, we're showcasing, these places are often seen globally as the best in the world. Well, do you know what? Scotland's as good as, and here's what you need to know. We just delivered one for Boston, Massachusetts. So that's what we're about in Scottish Business Network. But if there's anything each of us individually can do to shore up and rise and support the fantastic entrepreneurial activity you're seeing, particularly among women, and particularly around women who are starting their businesses, take that opportunity, offer to help, offer to give advice, offer to mentor, offer to just listen. But also just take them along. You'd be amazed the impact that makes.
Take one person along. And well, you've just been modeling so much of what you're recommending for others to do. So thank you so much for coming on, Christine.
A joy, Tom. Thank you.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you.